This is the pilot episode in a video series that will examine the nuance and subtle intricacies of the cutscenes found in Metal Gear Solid V: The Phantom Pain. Though relatively few and far between compared to other Hideo Kojima games, the cutscenes in The Phantom Pain are packed with little details that are very easy to miss. Of course, given the nature of interpretation and subjectivity, some of what I'll say here is just one way of looking at the game. With that disclaimer out of the way, let's start by comparing the two slightly altered versions of the first mission in the game, later called The Man Who Sold the World. The Phantom Pain opens only once. Even if you replay the prologue or play The Man Who Sold the World, you won't be able to repeat this, the earliest section of the game, without completely restarting. We hear a plane crash after the controls become unresponsive on board, and then sirens are heard off in the distance. This happens over the beginning quote by Romanian philosopher Emil Cioran that Skullface will later quote himself about language and nationalism. But it's important to point out Cioran never actually wrote in English, and few of his writings have ever been officially translated from their original tongue of French. Is something lost in the process of translation? That's the question this example seems to present. The Phantom Pain will come to suggest yes, and in some ways this is evident even in the differences between Big Boss and his mental translation, if you will, his mimetic copy, Venom Snake. For the Phantom Pain, language is not a mirror of reality. It is as much a reflection of the subject as object. This helps explain why each time as Venom Snake we remember an event, something subtly changes about how it's remembered. One of the best examples here is of the recollection of Paz's death. In the original scene from Ground Zeroes, we can see the medic who will become Venom Snake's face. We can still see fires from the destruction of Mother Base reflected on the water, and when the bomb goes off, Paz instantly disappears. In a different version of the scene, remembered by Venom Snake when he first begins meeting with the hallucination of Paz, the medic is wearing a mask. There's no fire on the water, and Paz isn't killed by a bomb. The chopper crashes when it's hit by an enemy missile. In the last reprise of the scene at the end of the game, there's still no fire on the water. Medic has the face that you designed for him at the start of The Phantom Pain, and if we look carefully, the bomb explodes under Paz, so her silhouette remains for an instant visible against the flames. Each of these are mutually exclusive. Each are essentially translations of the same scene. Yet though they all basically depict the same event, something subtle gets altered or lost each time.
It can only begin to decay. No mentality can last forever. When the body dies, the will dies with it.
As Orwell's novel, 1984, one of the most essential referent points for The Phantom Pain, tells us, quote, "Reality is inside the skull." Our sense of reality is, to a large extent, debatably, subjective and individual. When we die, it dies with us, and as we change, so too do our memories, our thoughts, our perceptions. This is exactly what Skullface is so haunted by. The loss of truth, of a personal truth once infiltrated by the wages of language and time. By the parasite that is, words. Keep all this in mind going forward as the question of whether what we're seeing in Venom Snake's memories is really real becomes more and more pressing. Next, we transition to where we're told is outer heaven in just another day in a war without end. This scene too will replay in slightly different form at the very end of the game. So in other words, the Phantom Pain, you might say, has the V-shaped structure of a mirror's reflection. That's really crucial given how the content of the game details how our protagonist, Venom Snake, gradually pieces together that all along he wasn't the real legendary mercenary Big Boss, but rather his phantom. That recognition makes the mirror an apt visual metaphor, but notice it's somewhat missing from the opening loop. Venom Snake himself is basically off camera, as much as the mirror is. And all focus is directed towards the Walkman and the tape. There's a bit of misdirection or ambiguity with the tape, though. Here, it seems to be literal, as labeled to be just a copy of Midge Ure's cover of David Bowie's The Man Who Sold the World. But at the end, the title is more metaphorical. Here, it's a message from Big Boss, the man who sold the world the idea that he's you.
Doctor! You're as useless as I thought!
He was a doctor, too. In his mind, that past no longer exists.
You and your friend will die here!
Playing with language, as we'll see, will be a fundamental aspect to the Phantom Pain. At any rate, at the start of the game, the man who sold the world starts to play, and we are apparently pulled back into Venom Snake's memories. Of course, this is something that will only be clear once we've actually played the game. Through this cipher of Snake's imperfect recollection, we see some clues about how in reality he's only been in a medically induced coma, locked in a mysterious half-state between waking and sleep, for Ocelot and Cypher to implant in him false memories. The clue is that it isn't that our eyes are open that tips the nurse off we're awake. It's the light, the recognition that she sees in our eyes, that makes her dash so fast out of the room that she knocks over the tape player.
O que vai ser, meu?
Now, was the man who sold the world the trigger for our awakening? Or was it just coincidentally playing by our side the second we woke up? Who knows? Although I'd wager it's more likely the former than the latter. If we compare the first scene of the game with the last, a kind of remix effect, characteristic of all the game's recursions, is on full display. When we time Venom's placement of the Walkman down from both scenes, for example, it's evidently the exact same moment in time. And yet, things are missing from both sequences compared to the other. Camera angles differ, and items seem to go missing. Even more curiously, details about the room subtly yet actively change throughout the finale. The logo on the door changes from Diamond Dogs to Outer Heaven, for example, while the honeybee homing weapon becomes the MSX2, and Venom's audio tape becomes a data tape. Strange, huh? This theme of the impermanence and fallibility of memory, the Phantom Pain shares, if not directly borrows, from Orwell's 1984. It's on clear display in the game's iconic opening credit sequence, where our perception as Venom Snake is quite literally distorted. There are a couple of secrets in the opening that you just can't track all at once, requiring multiple playthroughs. I'd argue a major conceit for the Phantom Pain, evoked even by its own very namesake, a condition experienced by post-amputees where they feel pain in a limb that's no longer there, is the untrustworthiness of our own minds. And I'd further contend one of the myriad ways the game achieves this theme is via inducing in the player what's known as apophenia, or, to quote the Skeptic's Dictionary, the spontaneous perception of connections and meaningfulness of unrelated phenomena. The more we look for secrets, in other words, the more that we may imagine or invent them where they otherwise do not exist. That's the major danger in a project such as this one.
Yeah, Miller was calling it the arm that wasn't there. You have any pain?
Every now and then.
Where?
My fingertips. My left fingertips.
Sounds like phantom pain. Your brain still remembers your old hand.
With this risk now fully acknowledged up front, let me go into some of the strange mirror-like symmetry that I seem to see all over the opening of the Phantom Pain. One could say that, going off what I already mentioned about the game's structural V-shaped resemblance to a mirror, that the hospital room itself is full of V-shapes and reflections, symmetrical doubles, least of all being, of course, Venom Snake and Big Boss. We can see V's in the fan blades, the support beams, and elsewhere in the room. Of course, a V shape is one of the simplest, perhaps most common possible shapes in existence. Seeing it everywhere may be totally unimportant, outside of an ominous indicator as to my own mental state while contemplating this game. But other repetitions and doubles I'm less inclined to shrug off right away. They're as follows. The same objects face each other on opposite sides of the room. Much as we find overall the room's been divided into two more or less identical partitions. The really big repetition for me here is the mirror concealed by the curtain. Doesn't it look a little familiar? A little like the bathroom mirror at the start of the game? I've already stated that there's a cold open, one that turns rather hot, that we only see once when beginning a new game. Well, there's as just of an evasive one-time only title screen, which springs to life upon the sound of Snake's iDroid after a mysterious woman's voice says into a phone, "V has come to." At the end, we'll get a tape that will tell us "V has come to" is the code phrase designed to formally begin the operation concocted by our old friend and current nemesis, Major Zero, the operation to swap Big Boss with a sleeper agent in more ways than one. Note, by the way, the Fox logo on Snake's tape sleeve at the start of the game and at the end. This will be, it seems, his final mission for a unit that no longer exists, not unlike the boss in MGS3, and maybe even also like Raiden in MGS2. There's the sense that, in response to this magic phrase, a whole world of echoing, cacophonous voices, a veritable Greek chorus, is thereby brought to life. Then, the fever pitch resolves with the aforementioned sound of the iDroid and the machine-like voice that we recognize from Snake's futuristic device he used in Ground Zeroes, the iDroid, which echoes the sentence in yet another act of repetition, of translation, of body doubles.
V has come to.
V has come to.
If we look closely and carefully, we'll notice something's amiss about this title screen. The figure veiled in green behind the drapery, his head is perfectly aligned to suggest via the fan blades a decapitation. Severed heads, least of all those of pigs, will become a recurring motif. There is a real sense in which Big Boss's head, metaphorically and maybe literally, has been swapped with our own. The Man Who Sold the World opens with a completely different intro. It takes us back to the day of Ground Zeroes, 3/16/1975. 3:16 may be a reference to the famous Bible verse, John 3:16, roughly paraphrasing from memory, "For God so loved the world he gave his only begotten Son, that man may not perish but have everlasting life." The relevance of this famous Bible verse may have to do with Venom's Snake as a sort of Christ-like figure, a martyr who will die in the name of something greater than himself. It's worth noting both the Phantom Pain in 1984 open also around Easter, the anniversary of Jesus' resurrection. In a nod to Orwell's 1984, meanwhile, speaking of literary or textual references, which opened with the famous line, "All the clocks were striking 13, it's 13:31. And note the mirrored numerical symmetry there. The location given seems to be a nod to the place Peace Walker began, and in turn where Snake and Miller's outfit MSF began too, Barranquilla, Colombia. It's also a reference to the war on drugs, but that's a subject for a different video. The name Hospital Mina de Barranquilla likely, covertly, points to the cover identity used in Peace Walker by Vladimir Zadornov, Ramon Galvez Mina. In Man Who Sold the World, we're told something about what actually happened to Big Boss after the events of Ground Zeroes. One medic says, "BP's dropping, we need to intubate now." Then another says, "Cardiac arrest, he's in VFib." Then they try defibrillation, or electrically shocking Big Boss to restart his heart's normal rhythm. Basically, he can't breathe. He loses so much oxygen, his blood pressure drops, which is called in this context hypotension, and then he has a heart attack, perhaps as a nod to Fox Die from MGS1. VFib is short for ventricular fibrillation. Essentially, Big Boss's heart malfunctions once he suffocates, shutting his brain off from its needed supply of oxygen. By the time he's stabilized, his brain's gone too long without oxygen, and so he essentially enters a brain-dead coma. Whether or not he ever really recovers is totally open to interpretation. This subject of brain death has been one of near constant fascination for Kojima, going back to at least Policenauts. When is a person truly, as opposed to legally, dead? That is the question that the subject of brain death seems to pose. And what happens after we die? It's the kind of mystery that lacks a definite answer, and one that would continue to inform his next project, 2019's Death Stranding. It seems rather crucial to bring up the following. The full name of our protagonist in The Phantom Pain is PVS, Punished Venom Snake. For years, the medical term for a badly brain-damaged, wakeful yet unconscious condition was PVS, Persistent Vegetative State. Unlike a coma, PVS implies, as the prologue is named, an awakening. In a PVS, a subject may open their eyes and go in and out of sleep, but they nevertheless haven't regained consciousness. Nowadays, the medical community doesn't prefer this term because of the ethical and even philosophical implications of the word vegetable. But nevertheless, I believe this explains what I'd mentioned about the nurse's reaction to you. Now, there's a nurse in this scene who reappears as one of the nurses in Cyprus. When it comes to uncanny resemblances and reappearing acts, though, I'd be nuts not to bring up here one of the Phantom Pain's most daring stunts. This is Professor Sergio Canavero. Look familiar? It's almost certain that Canavero was covertly image captured by Kojima Productions while giving a speech. Canavero is famous for believing in the possibility of head transplants. His resemblance to Dr. Constantino from The Phantom Pain is so unbelievable that he considered suing Konami, and the press actually published details from an Italian police report to refute rumors that his entire career was somehow some kind of Hideo Kojima ruse. As Pocket Lint points out, the likeliest time that Kojima Productions could have clandestinely captured Canavero's likeness was during a TED Talk that took place in Cyprus, named TEDx Limassol. These words could also form an anagram for solid metals. At worst, a curious coincidence. Not that I'm suggesting that Canavero was necessarily in on the ruse, it just may indicate why this was the perfect time, in more ways than one, for Kojima Productions to, as it were, strike. The event also used a logo which read, "Everything you know is wrong." That sounds awfully, if not coincidentally, close to a lyric from a song that would be featured in a key trailer for The Phantom Pain, a song by the band Garbage named Not Your Kind of People. The song contains the refrain, "Everything's a lie." When the Doctor moves from the center to our left, look far to the right. His shadow's head seems to split and separate, in a trick of the light. All these little tricks and Easter eggs about heads seem to foreshadow how Cypher essentially have emptied Venom Snake's head and filled it with themselves, yet another nod to 1984, filling him, in other words, with the memories of Big Boss. There's a lot of shadow play going on here, in fact. Her shadow here looks uncannily like Ishmael. A bit of foreshadowing, perhaps. Then there's the strange IV drip. Is this, whatever it really is, what's bringing Venom Snake out from his stupor? Here's the best up-close pic of it I could get. It seems to read 500 milliliters, number 7, year 1984. Strange, but highly ambiguous. It could mean anything or it could be nothing. It is worth noting, though, that all these strange elements present in the room, from the green IV bags to the cassette player, will return when we visit the Devil's house. The connections between the vocal cord parasites and Venom Snake's hypnagogic therapy are never laid out explicitly, but they're clearly linked, either literally or just symbolically. After all, in the opening, right before our eyes adjust, the brunette nurse seems to remove the IV bag before placing it on a metal tray she keeps momentarily on our stomach, although this is admittedly somewhat hard to see. In the nurse's syringe is a yellowish substance that, to my eyes, looks similar to what Ishmael will call digoxin and inject us with later on. Of course, this could just be an innocent case of a game reusing its own assets. Her wristwatch tells us, by the way, it is currently exactly 4 o'clock, or 1600 hours. Clocks and the measurement of time is itself a very important motif for 1984, and as these scrolling time indicators convey in the Phantom Pain, for MGSV as well. What are the nurses doing at the start? Checking your vitals, it seems, and, as I said, changing out your IV bag. The way they're positioned on both ends of the room makes it impossible to track them both at once. Already, it seems, certain themes of the Phantom Pain are being foreshadowed. We're already being thrust in a world that's much bigger and full of more information than we as an individual can possibly keep track of. It's worth pointing out that the radio, which is playing a news report as the doctor is talking, seems to be referring to the plane crash we heard at the start of the game.
How do you feel?
It's been 1 week since you came to. Now, let's try getting you out of that bed. Let's. Don't worry. You've lost some strength, but we've been maintaining your muscle mass through massages, CPM therapy, and EMS. Now, I need to explain something to you, but you mustn't be alarmed.
It's the same reporter that we'll hear again during Ocelot's briefing, World Affairs over the 9 years.
While the Soviets have indicated they are not participating in the Los Angeles Olympics, primarily because the United States has made no attempt to guarantee the safety of the Soviet Union's athletes, the United States is increasingly demonstrating the belief that the issue has nothing to do with its preparations, and in fact this is retaliation for the Western nations' boycott of the previous Moscow Olympics. That concludes today's news.
That's quite some news. Soviet Union not attending the LA Olympics? Yeah. Andropov's death has changed some things.
That turns out to be a hint that Big Boss woke up before you did, or at least it could be.
Boss, how are you back on your feet so quickly?
There's a non-smoking ward.
Boss.
And that also, in turn, if true, would likely mean that some of the tapes that you think are of you are really of the real Big Boss, furthering the impossibility of an objective account of these events. Something that we are somewhat tortured by with the constant pseudo-objective timestamps that convey the idea that this is an objective reality where things happen at a precise time and with a precise substance. This tape in question could have been recorded, as it's first implied, within the context of the other tapes we receive and at the time we receive them, en route to Pakistan. Or, what I think is maybe more likely, it could have been recorded prior to Venom Snake's awakening entirely back in the hospital. Who can say for sure? The very first lines in the game are already laying out what our journey of self-remembrance will become. After the doctor lets us input our name and date of birth, he delivers the bad but untrue news that we've been in a coma for 9 years, following an explosion. That makes us require sedation. And then, inexplicably, we black out for about a week, apparently. In the next scene, the Doctor essentially tells us that bits and pieces of Paz, who died horribly in MGS Ground Zeroes, are now embedded in our bodies, as well as shrapnel. There's a little nod to a problem that real sufferers of post-amputation phantom pain experience as Snake looks down at the wrong side of his body at first. This is kind of complicated and outside the remit of these videos though, so I can't really go into the real condition of phantom pain too much at this time. But if you're interested, I recommend Phantoms in the Brain by Dr. Ramachandran. Venom Snake, we're told, has been brain damaged. This is just like what happened to the boss right before the end of World War II, when the Soviets nearly got her killed with a bit of disinformation. Ironically, the word for the specific part of the brain that you've been hurt in, the cerebral cortex, in Latin also means bark, in terms of a tree, not a dog. But speaking of barking, it seems a dog's bark is what wakes you up for the third and final time, far in the distance. We'll talk more about Snake's brain and how it's been damaged next time. It should be noted that the nurse seemed to wheel in the exact chemicals that Ishmael would momentarily need to burn quiet. Of course, this could just be a coincidence or a case of reusing assets. Now, next comes the part that's the most different in the reprise of these events we'll see at the end. 2 weeks after awakening, we come to as the Doctor and nurse are whispering in the corner. Now, in the prologue version, Snake doesn't seem to know or yet remember he knows Greek. It's only in the second time around we actually understand what they're saying. And notice that the Doctor seems to assume you understand, because his first words to you are directly a follow-up to their conversation.
It's true. There are those who wish he would never woken up. You should be dead, but you're not.
By the way, this sudden shift from one language to another by multilinguals like the Doctor here is called code switching. Just to show how important even the dialogue in The Phantom Pain is, let's compare the following sections from both versions of these events now. In the first version, the Doctor's lines are in a different order, and by the second, some will be missing altogether.
Κάποιος ήδη γνωρίζει ότι έχει ξυπνήσει. Διατρέχει μεγάλο κίνδυνο. Πρέπει να ενεργήσουμε άμεσα. Προετοιμάστε τον για εγχείρηση. Πιστεύω.
It's true. There are those who wish he would never woken up. You should be dead, but you're not. The wheels are in motion. Your enemies are everywhere. We must alter your appearance immediately. Otherwise, I fear you won't leave this place alive. It's a wide open world up there, so there's something we need to take care of first. I'm going to change your appearance. We have no other choice. What you look like, however. Very good. Now let's remove these bandages. Your face has healed nicely. To tell you the truth, these bandages were more for your protection, to hide you from those who want you dead. As of today, your name is Ahab. Forget everything. Your name, your past. This is you, as you've lived until this day. Tomorrow, it becomes phantom.
Έννετ σε κατάσταση για πλαστική εγχείρηση.
Κάποιος ήδη γνωρίζει ότι έχει ξυπνήσει. Διατρέχει μεγάλο κίνδυνο. Πρέπει να ενεργήσουμε άμεσα. Προετοιμάστε τον μια εγχείρηση. Δεν το πιστεύω.
It's true. There are those who wish you would never woken up. You should be dead, but you're not. The wheels are in motion. Your enemies are everywhere. We must alter your appearance immediately. Otherwise, I fear you won't leave this place alive. It's a wide open world up there, so there's something we need to take care of first. This is you, as you've lived until this day. I'm going to change your appearance. We have no other choice. Very good. Now let's remove these bandages. Your face has healed nicely. To tell you the truth, these bandages were more for your protection, to hide you from those who want you dead. As of today, your name is Ahab. Forget everything. Your name, your past. Everything feels all right?
In the prologue, the Doctor makes it seem as though when we select our avatar's face, that this will be the new face that Snake will wear to cover his identity. But bizarrely, at first we're led to believe this plastic surgery happened basically instantly, perhaps conveying another gap in our memory, and then we're shown a mirror that shows Snake's face, implying that, in fact, the plastic surgery has yet to take place. We'll cover some of this in a bit. In the second version, we're shown our non-Snake visage as our real face, and then 48 hours pass before the rest of the scene. In the prologue, we don't flip over the picture or view it completely, and the next sequence differs too. Again, showcasing the crucial relevance of the symbol of the mirror, we're shown Snake's face through a mirror and told this is us as we've lived until this day. It's the same line the Doctor says earlier in the timeline in the reprise of this scene, except then he's showing us our non-Snake face. Then, though in the reprise the Doctor simply asks if everything's alright as Quiet stalks in and kills the nurse behind us, In the prologue here, the Doctor says tomorrow it becomes your phantom, something he never says the second time around. If it's true that Big Boss steals your face to avoid detection in the phantom pain, it would resemble at least two things. How certain drug lords have tried to evade capture over the years, as well as the opening of Act 3 of MGS4, when Old Snake uses the face camo once the enemy knows what he looks like. We can also deduce that the phantom pain indirectly is telling us the story of how Revolver Ocelot will go on to concoct his ruse of Liquid's phantom arm, when he will trick the Patriots into thinking that he's possessed by the mental essence of Liquid Snake. Perhaps before there will be Ocelot with Liquid's arm, there is Venom Snake with Big Boss's face, or maybe, possibly even his head. Who knows? The hypnagogic therapy the Patriots use to keep Venom Snake in a medically induced coma in turn seems to foreshadow how eventually they'll keep the real Big Boss in a permanent state of comatose brain death by using nanomachines. There's vicious irony in the immediate presence of the Star of Bethlehem in this room. If we look close again back at that one-time-only title screen I mentioned, lingering here for a bit will reveal the floating dispersed particle-like petals of the flower being kicked up by the fan. These floating petals are very similar to the final scene with the boss in MGS3. And of course, they also conjure to mind Skullface scattering the fox patches at the start of Ground Zeroes. As we'll see, this is a guilt-ridden opening excursion into hell. Whether we are or are not him, we are in a version of the real Big Boss's own personal hell, his Room 101 from 1984. In Orwell's novel, the neo-totalitarian system of Ingsoc studies the psychologies and personal histories of its own heretics, so that unlike all its ancestors from the Inquisition to the Nazis to Stalinist Russia, the traitor in their system will be genuinely converted into a true blue member of the party before they're allowed to die. This is achieved through a personalized version of a practice that's rather old, a practice particularly salient for the ostensible indirect subject matter of the Phantom Pain, 21st Century War on Terror, and how it has evolved out of the Cold War. That practice is, of course, torture. The party's so-called thought police in the novel, inside the Ministry of Love, concoct the ultimate expression of a particular heretic's worst nightmare in Room 101. The moment of truth, of utter and complete brainwashing, happens in Room 101, a special torture chamber. As we go on, I'll come to argue that the entirety of the Phantom Pain is a version of Big Boss's Room 101, a realization of all his worst fears and doubts. The likelihood that it's all being experienced by a stand-in, Big Boss's proxy Venom Snake, does nothing to lessen the imminent and utter sense of horror that it provides. After all, as I'll discuss much later on, what Cypher does to Venom Snake in this game is merely another version of what they, in an earlier form, already did back in 1964 to the real Snake. Keep this constellation of ideas of guilt, irony, torture, and nightmares in mind during the opening once people start getting killed. Things begin with a series of torturous reversals throughout this early section of the mission. First, you think you've been saved from your enemies by a disguise, only for that disguise to immediately get found out. Then you think the Doctor may save you with his handgun, only for him to die and his gun to fall along with you to the floor. Then you think you might be able to save yourself with his gun, only for the gun you're reaching to get turned against you instead. Then you think you've been rescued by the faceless hero in the next bed, only for him to be revealed as basically powerless and unarmed, and then for him to get badly hurt. Then you think you're going to die, only for the other man to save you in the last minute by brutally immolating your attacker. It's the kind of push-pull, constant tension the game of role reversals that, when you think about it, has defined MGS as a tactical espionage action series from the get-go, except here it's being applied to the psychological realm. Now, when the Doctor takes out his gun, it's a big hint this guy isn't just any old doctor. He's one of Cypher's agents, and as he's already told us, he expects some kind of threat to come for you, but not one, maybe, as silent or as lethal as Quiet. Now, the differences in the sequence of events as I've just explained them totally change the context for what happens next. In the prologue, it seems as though the Doctor didn't get to give us plastic surgery in time and we're still wearing Snake's face. In reality, apparently, as we see in the reprise, he did give us the surgery, which is why we have Big Boss's face. So how does Quiet know which of us, Ahab or Ishmael, is the real Big Boss? My guess is not by sight, she must have intel on whose bed is whose. In the ensuing fight, Ishmael neutralizes Quiet using a makeshift method that's very similar to the one Solid Snake will use to nearly kill the real Big Boss at the end of Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake. This is a bit of foreshadowing, if you will. Now, next, Ishmael, seemingly unfazed by the knife Quiet lodged in his arm, delivers an injection that he claims is digoxin, and then bids you to follow him. Digoxin doesn't have the effects that he implies it does, so it's a little mysterious why he names this chemical so explicitly. There's a double nod earlier, both to MGS3 and 4, as we tried to clutch the falling Star of Bethlehem petals, which also seemingly hinted that Venom Snake has been implanted with memories of the boss, because these flowers already seem to hold a great deal of significance for him. And notice also that he seems to yet again have forgotten or repressed from his memory that he's missing his left hand. What's wild is the same spot Ishmael gets stabbed by Quiet, Venom Snake will force a Diamond Dog to stab him in the secret cutscene that only plays if your GMP gets in the red. The knife will come back into play not only with Quiet, but also with Eli. I have no idea what this really means, but if you listen really closely to Venom Snake's first line, it has a strange, almost digital quality to it, almost like a filter, or a slight flanger effect, as heard on the guitar work, for example, in some of David Bowie's 1975 album Diamond Dogs.
What happened to the woman? What happened to the woman?
This could just be to convey a slight difference to their voices, or a drug-altered mental state, or that V's some kind of android akin to Kojima's Blade Runner-esque Snatcher bioroids, or I could just be mishearing things. Who knows? At any rate, the room is filled with information to drive home a sense of time and place. There's a calendar that seems to chart our vital signs over time, a map of Cyprus, and even a British flag to give us a sense of our current political region. Yet it's all almost too perfect, too clear-cut. If it were all fake, we would never know it. That's when the paranoia seeps in, second-guessing your own eyes and ears. Winston in 1984 tells us that's what Ingsoc, the party of Big Brother, are all about. I'm not necessarily suggesting that you're not really in Cyprus. I'm more pointing out, if you weren't in Cyprus, if this wasn't the year 1984, Venom Snake would have no way of knowing it. We're totally at the mercy of our masters. And even the sexy nurses have a kind of psychosexual menace to them, an ironic double edge. They meld together symbols of sex, life, and death all in one. When we eventually get out of our hospital bed and begin to crawl, the slow transition we make from crawling to walking to running dimly echoes the development of a baby. Are these women safeguarding our birth or our death? It's all beautifully and hauntingly twisted together. It'll turn out to be a bit of doublethink, really. The mental combination of two contradictory images at once. It's both. These events mark our birth after death, our afterlife. As Big Boss said at the end of Peace Walker, our heaven and our hell. Speaking of hell, when the Man on Fire appears, Even without the need for words, it's clearly conveyed who he's meant to resemble, the devil. Now next comes a little reference to the opening of Orwell's novel, 1984. When you two get attacked by the man on fire, it puts the elevator out of commission, forcing the suffering venom snake to take the stairs. This is like how at the start of 1984, Winston Smith, badly suffering from a varicose ulcer in his leg, is forced to climb the stairs in his apartment building because the elevator's broken. This image would be echoed in turn by David Bowie in his song Diamond Dogs, where the character Halloween Jack, because the elevator's broke, slides down a rope. There's a sense that he's finally come for us, the hour of our judgment is at hand. There's a hallucinatory, apocalyptic quality to the hospital escape, really. It's teeming with religious imagery, and the man on fire is just the beginning. If you notice, he shows up wearing an intact version, it looks like, of Volgan's jacket from back during the Virtuous mission. It's almost instantly consumed in the ensuing flames. The combination of nods to Psycho Mantis's first appearance at the elevator in MGS1 and Volgan's on the rope bridge in MGS3 is yet another case of doublethink. This coyly lays out the job of the Phantom Pain in terms of MGS lore. As the proverbial missing link, it will take us from Volgan to Mantis, MGS3 to MGS1. Well, that's plenty for now. If this video gets, say, over 30,000 views, I'll be sure to return with more analysis and a much longer video on the cutscenes from the Phantom Pain. Until next time, boss.